It's kind of like Wayne's World. You're not supposed to count the 3, 2, 1. Remember that in Wayne's World. um, so yeah, today we have with us. We are privileged to be graced with the presence of one David Marmon, who is a not a strength coach. You're a sports performance coach at University of Illinois Chicago.
Correct.
It's got to be weird for an Alabama guy to be in the Midwest up in Chicago, and
It's a little
it's
different
not.
for
I mean,
sure.
how good's the fried chicken and all that there?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, you've got a long career of helping people with their fitness and their overall health, and you started at Auburn and went to Georgia Southern to get your master's. And right, am I right so far? And
So far,
then,
so good.
so you went to. When did you go to run down the sequence of universities you went to before you started your own thing?
So when I finished Georgia Southern as a grad assistant, went to the College of William and Mary in '03, '04, where I met Coach Norris there, and probably yourself at the time. From there, I went to University of
Then,
Iowa for a year. And then from Iowa, went to Indiana State University as the head strength and conditioning coach there. From there, came back to Williamsburg, where I did a little stint in the private sector, working for a couple private facilities in town before opening up my own facility in 2009. Yeah, 2009 is when we opened up Marmon Muscle, and then owned my own private facility for almost a decade before selling. And then after that, got into the tactical world, where I was at Fort Bragg working with an Air Force Special Operation Command squadron. And then in last year, decided to get back into college athletics and came to UIC.
cool. So yeah, I mean, you bring a vast uh, breadth of experience to this. So what made you get into that profession? Like, when did you decide I want to help athletes get better?
Yeah, yeah. So I think growing up an overweight kid was probably kind of what did it for me. I was a little bit of a mama's boy, wasn't into sports or anything athletic, and my mom kind of threw me into football and wrestling at a young age. Um, and I sort of gravitated to the process of training and being coached and overcoming challenges and whatnot. And I was a slightly above average youth and high school athlete. So when I got to the collegiate level and walked on, I found out what a strength conditioning coach was. I met our strength coach day one when I was a walk on at Jacksonville State. And I remember I went to him and asked him if they paid him to do what he did. And he said, yeah. And so at that point, I was like, this is definitely what I want to do. I love the idea of kind of being behind the scenes, working with athletes and, off the field setting and preparing them for, the rigors of competition. And so from that day forward, I never considered doing anything else. So once my athletic days were over, I just sort of dove head first and immerse myself in the world of strength conditioning and sports performance and try to learn as much as I can from as many people as I could. And it's kind of taken me where I am now.
Cool. And so at the collegiate level, what's the role of the strength and performance coach um, from your standpoint? And then I'll ask you the same thing, Chris.
Yeah.
Who I didn't
So
introduce. Sorry, David. I didn't introduce. We have Chris Norris back again. He's the men's soccer coach at the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia. Sorry, David. Go ahead.
it's all right. Um, so in terms of like operational definitions, we keep like going back and forth between strength conditioning and sports performance. And I guess technically they're the same thing, but we're starting to see more of the terminology usage of sports performance rather than strength conditioning. I think when I got into the industry, strength conditioning was just about, banging heavy weights and, running kids into the ground. And what we've identified is that hey, we're capable of doing a whole lot more. So we look more at the holistic approach to enhancing performance, and lifting weights and running are just a small part of that. So my role as a sports performance professional in the collegiate setting is I'm a subject matter expert, and my job is to advise our sport coaches on tactics and putting together plans to help them optimize their team's performance throughout the year, and also develop student athletes over the 4 or 5 year period. So that's really my role. And again, I think if coaches look at it as a subject matter expert and an advisor, so to speak, it clearly defines the lines of what your job is. Like Chris's job as the head coach is the one to make the difficult decisions. My job is just to like be in his ear and make suggestions and recommendations to him. So that's technically what our role is as a sports performance professional.
Gotcha. Norris, like, how do you lean on the staff there at William & Mary to help your athletes and that sort of thing?
Yeah, it's a challenge because we don't necessarily, like, our fall schedule when we're in season and competing doesn't really lend itself to an easy way to work in sports performance. We've got to get a little bit creative sometimes with it. But the bottom line is that we rely heavily on our sports performance department to help prepare our athletes for competition. And, a large part of that is making sure that they're strong enough, quick enough, injury resistant enough, flexible enough, all these different things that are really important to them being able to perform at their best on the field. There's also an element of defending culture. We want to make sure that the things that we're doing in our training sessions, our soccer specific training sessions, are mirrored in terms of, intensity or attitude or the commitment to trying to get better. And so we, make sure that we're having discussions about what we want that to look like. We're also in regular contact about, kids that maybe aren't doing as well, not just doing well in terms of performance, but, maybe they've got stressors outside of their sport, and maybe that's what's affecting them. So, trying to kind of be that overarching umbrella that, that catches, all things as far as trying to help kids perform at their best.
So you guys obviously, as soccer coaches or managing the team, lean on these performance coaches that are on your staff, to, maybe they're picking up on something that you're not seeing, or so yeah, they're kind of an integral part of, keeping the team.
Absolutely. Look, it can take on different forms in different universities. Like, we have a specific coach who works with us, and he's great. But our staff is a little bit thin, so it's not like he's traveling with us all the time and that kind of thing. So like I said, for us, we've got to get a little bit creative at times to try to make sure that we're integrating sports performance into what we're doing. In a perfect world, we would have a dedicated coach, or at least for the primary season, we would have a dedicated coach that was with us all the time. Unfortunately, resources don't always allow for that. So we've got to get a little bit creative, but, we see sports performance as a vital part of what we're doing. And we try to incorporate, their knowledge and their expertise in the best possible way we can within the restrictions that we have.
Yeah. So David, talk a little bit about, how a kid in the off season can prepare him or herself for the season, and from a functional standpoint, and as well as an injury prevention standpoint. What's the overall program look like, and with the end objective in all of us in helping kids who don't necessarily have access to a team, strength professional sports performance professionals to help them along the way?
Yeah, that's a big question, and it can get pretty lengthy in that explanation. But I'll try to like sum it up into a digestible answer here. But so I mean, again, like when the off season gets here, we're basically going to debrief and look at what happened the season before. You know, I'm going to take input in from the student athletes about things that they think they need to work on. I'm obviously going to talk to the sport coach and talk about things that they'd like to see happen for those individuals. And then, you know, I sit down and like assess each kid, and we sit down and talk about like, what do you want to accomplish during the off season? I'll have a pretty global program for the team, but there will certainly be some individualization from athlete to athlete regarding certain things. I mean, obviously, you know, if a kid's got a medical history of certain issues, then we want to make sure that the program doesn't do anything to create pain or any issues regarding that history. So there'll be some individualization there. Maybe some kids need to put on a little lean mass. Maybe some kids need to lose a little fat mass. And then other kids with the conditioning element, I mean, that's something that we kind of work on year round. And particularly here at UIC, like we want student athletes that are cardiovascularly fit year round. So that's something that we're constantly addressing. And during the off season, we'll just get creative in ways that we do it. So it's not so arduous and monotonous, which sometimes it can be. But the good thing about the off season is that we have more time with them. You know, in season, we're certainly changing our approach to training, and everything's geared towards prepping each week for the games that they're going to be playing. But during the off season, you know, training on the field, you know, it's at the same priority level as what we're doing in here, and our coaching staff does a great job of making sure that we communicate daily regarding what it is they're going to be doing. Is it going to be a high intensity day? Is it going to be a low intensity day? And we want to sort of echo that with what we're doing here in the room. And then with sports medicine as well, like they're a big part of the communication loop as well. If we've got athletes that are rehabilitating an injury or kids that are maybe limited, they're not a full go, we'll talk about a training plan for them for the day. So we try to avoid situations where we don't have a plan for any student athlete. Every time they step into the room, we want to make sure that they feel they're a part of the team and also that they're getting the training that they need. In regards to like specificity of training, you know, that's a buzzword that we hear a lot here. You know, coaches will come in and be like, I noticed that like the soccer team's workout looks very similar to the baseball team's workout. And so we try to do a good job of educating our coaches about like how we want to transfer the transfer process of things we're doing here into to the sport itself. And we have a pyramid for that. And the base of the pyramid is a lot of like generalized training. So again, the majority, there's going to be more similarities that we see in the weight room between the sports than differences. But as we get closer to the season, you're going to see more of those specialized and specific movements that mimic the needs and demands of the sport. And that's when those things will show up. But I mean, every student athlete needs to be able to squat, hinge, push, press. So you're going to see a lot of that from sport to sport.
Chris, so when you're starting to recruit an athlete, how important is it that you know that they've paid attention to their fitness and to spending some time in the weight room trying to develop themselves? I mean, is that something that you get into, or I mean, how important is that to you? And how often do you?
Yeah, look, it's not. I think what's more important is having a good sense for where someone is in their physical development. So it's not as important to us that they have done a lot, because everyone's situation is a little bit different as far as what's available to them. What's more important is that we have a good sense for, one, where are they in their physical development? Are they pretty mature at this point in their life, or do they have significant room to grow and develop? I mean, a lot of times we like those guys that have some room still to grow and develop physically, because we think we can help them there, and that they'll be significantly better after a couple years in our program than they are as a high school senior, for example. we do try to assess how important it is for a guy to get better, how important it is for him in his mind to work hard and try to continue to develop. We don't want guys that are just sort of satisfied with where they are, or they're like, I just don't like the weight room. That's not an acceptable answer or attitude in our program. And so, we want to try to assess how willing guys are to work at it, and how important it is for them to keep getting better. But where they are in their journey as far as sports performance is not really as important to us.
Yeah. So to build off what Chris said, having come from an environment where I was training high school kids and preparing them for the collegiate level, my approach with those kids was always like trying to build a robust work capacity, because they're about to step into a setting where like the demands are going to be higher. The expectations are going to be higher. So the best thing I can do is give them a good aerobic base, the ability to do a lot of work, have good muscular endurance. And then when they get to college, their strength conditioning coach will really focus on developing max strength and max power. I remember back being so frustrated when freshmen would come in and like they get injured the first day of practice because, a soft tissue injury, something that they just from not preparing, not training, or they attempt the fitness test and they can't make it through the fitness test. So, my approach with training high school kids was always like, we want to make sure that like we're going to have no problem with the fitness test, and that we're going to be able to make it through like a very physical training session, sometimes multiple training sessions.
So what would an example of a fitness test be for UIC and then William & Mary?
Yeah. So, again, like personally, I really don't care. Right. I know that sounds bad, but like, it's more important to me that we're addressing the needs of fitness than like testing and evaluating it, because at the end of the day, like what's important is that they're ready to come play soccer. Right. But history, and sort of cultural things like make the fitness test a pretty important part of preseason. Here we do the beep test. The men and women do a different version, and the coaches sort of come up with mandatory minimum. Although like if they come in and they don't hit the mandatory minimum, in my opinion, like they still have to go play soccer and train. Rather than have like a pass fail scenario, I think it should be more of a competition where like this is your opportunity to showcase your fitness for your coaches and see how you rack and stack against your teammates. And if the coaches feel that you're somebody that didn't score at the level that you should, then then extra conditioning, not as punishment but as out of a necessity, should probably be added to their plate. But again, like there's so many fitness tests out right now. And again, like with our programming for the summer, I'm trying to address like multiple different energy systems. We do like like something like a really simple tempo run where like I'll have them like jog for 20 seconds, sprint for 20 seconds, walk for 20 seconds. And we'll do that starting off for 10 minutes. And then as the summer, we get further and further this summer, we'll add 2 minutes every 2 weeks. So by the end, they're doing that consecutively for 20 plus minutes. So you're getting a little bit of different pace, mimicking sort of the demands of the sport. And then on Wednesdays, we typically do like a max aerobic speed test where we'll do like a timed mile, or we'll do like 400-meter intervals with sufficient rest in between. And then I'll calculate like their max aerobic speed there. And again, I'll rank them, I'll rack them and stack them, and it gives them something to be competitive about. And then on Fridays, we typically run the beep test without any sort of like consequence. What I have them do is they run the volume that's expected of them, but they're allowed to take breaks. So they're allowed to miss reps. And their goal throughout the summer is to decrease the number of breaks that they have to take and the number of reps that they miss. So it sort of takes away this like this mystery of like, oh, what's it going to feel like to get to level 9? When we get there, they've been to level 9 several times throughout the summer. Now it's about fatigue management. How do I manage my fatigue to be able to get to the mark I'm supposed to get without having to miss and without having to take breaks?
So how would like a high school age kid mimic that in their training? What should they focus on as they prepare to become a college athlete? just go out for a 5-mile run, or, how should they break out how they work out through a week, and then how, talk a little bit about periodization too, and, when you should have heavy loads and when you shouldn't, and that sort of thing.
All right, this can get real boring, Scott. So yeah, I mean, like, look, if a kid wants to go out and run 5 miles, like, yeah, there's value to that, right? Like having a strong aerobic base is never going to hurt you, right? What could hurt you is just the pounding the pavement, like that's just extra stress on the joints. And it doesn't necessarily mimic the exact demands of your sport. However, like, again, I think there's something to be said about having that aerobic base. It's going to allow you to develop your anaerobic power and stuff as you start incorporating more sport specific stuff. But I think, with anything, the program has got to meet you where you're at, right? Like we want to make sure that like we're being progressive in what we do, and maybe starting off with something that's a little bit easier than what the student athlete's capable of doing, and then making it more difficult as each week goes by. And again, you want to reverse engineer, like what's going to be asked of them, what are they going to be asked to do when they arrive? That's the end goal. And then we sort of work back from there and develop a timeline to help them get there. In terms of like max strength, like this is probably, again, an unpopular statement or opinion, but like, I don't hold a lot of value to the metric of maximal strength for a lot of field and court sports. I think, yes, you definitely need to be strong, but the majority of like your transferable strength that you're going to develop is probably somewhere between 65 and 85% of your 1 rep max. However, during the spring, we will work like a 12-week cycle where we build up to a 1 rep max on certain lifts. Typically, it's like, some sort of like lower extremity exercise, whether it's a back squat or a trap bar deadlift, a bench press, or like a dumbbell bench press, depending on the sport, and then like a weighted pull up. But again, like I said, the majority of the transferable strength that they're going to be able to use in their sport is somewhere between that 65 and 85. So again, I mean, the kids that go out and do like a 3x10 program and like really push themselves in terms of loading, that's going to help them in their sport in terms of like developing strength. So again, I feel like in my industry, we're battling these years of like overvaluing the 1 rep max. And again, to me, like I don't have a problem with the 1 rep max. I just feel like sometimes the juice isn't worth the squeeze, and you're putting student athletes into situations where like maybe the risk isn't worth the reward. So
yeah. I'm a little confused though. You didn't mention at all doing buys and tries. What day do I do those on?
That's a great question. So like I do buys and tries with my student athletes because they're 18 to 20-year-old boys, right? And like what kid that age doesn't want to have like, good looking arms, especially when they walk around with their shirt off. So I know if I don't throw that in my program, they're going to go do it anyway at the rec center. So typically every Friday we'll have like arm farm day where they get a good pump, and then we take their picture and we put it on social media, and they have a blast, just
yeah.
What it does is just creates a culture of like fun where they want to come to the weight room because they know everything we do isn't going to be so stuffy and methodical. Every once in a while, we're going to do some things that are just to let them be boys and have a good time,
Yep. Yeah. Talk about some of the things you can do from an injury prevention standpoint, to like a someone who maybe has like an ankle propensity to roll an ankle, or what can I do to best avoid an ACL injury, those sorts of things.
Well, I think the number one thing you can do is address lifestyle factors, right? Like making sure that you're getting appropriate sleep, you have somewhat of a structured, balanced diet, you hydrate properly, you have other life stressors in order. So again, we have our student athletes do a daily readiness questionnaire when they come in, and I actually look at the data and share it with the coaches. And if I see any like indicators that are concerning, like a low sleep score or like a low stress score, then I'll say, hey, maybe this is something we should follow up with the student athlete and have like a side conversation. And then again, like I have metrics from like the entire season of like what the readiness was throughout the season. We do what we can here in regards to helping address the nutritional piece. We have pre-fuel and post-fuel that we give the student athletes. So if I have kids coming in from a training session, they're probably a little gassed, blood sugar's probably a little bit low. We can give them some pre-fuel. And then when they leave, we have post-fuel that's going to be like, higher in protein and fat, stuff that's going to be a little bit heavier on the stomach, which they should take in after training. As far as the training itself goes, I mean, like, good training, good sound training is injury prevention, right? And again, I think it's important to have an outline of what that looks like. I mean, for us, or for me, I should say, I don't want to speak for my whole staff here, but I have an outline that I follow, and typically it involves like a structured warm-up. In our structured warm-up, we do both a dynamic warm-up and we also do like a movement prep. Movement prep would be sort of like mobility work on the ground, and we address like common areas and issues for soccer athletes or baseball athletes. So we're microdosing it on a daily basis, where these areas that tend to be problem areas, we're hitting them every time we see the kids. And again, when I say we're hitting it, we're talking about 5-6 minutes to make sure that it's being addressed and it's not being neglected or forgot about. And then the training itself, and again, this is just an outline. We'll do some sort of linear or lateral movement. Today, for example, our kids did like hill sprints and standing broad jumps for their movement training. And then the next day they might do like lateral shuffles and like weighted skaters, which are just a plyometric exercise for their movement-based stuff. And I'll typically pair the movement-based stuff with a plyometric. And all this needs to be appropriate depending on what time of the year it is and what other stimulus they have going on with training and practice and games and whatnot. From there, we'll hit some sort of lower extremity movement. Some days will be a bilateral movement where, both feet are in contact with the ground. Sometimes there'll be a unilateral movement where we're doing a single leg exercise. And then we want to make sure we're doing sagittal plane and frontal plane work. So sagittal plane, think like you're in a phone booth and you can only move like forward and backward, right? Frontal plane is going to be side to side stuff. So we want to make sure we're addressing both those, particularly like for the groin and hip flexor region, because we tend to see a lot of problems in there. So in addition to like mobilizing the area, we also want to strengthen it as well. Then we have transverse plane, which is going to be some rotation. So we'll throw in some rotational variations of those movements as well. Then we have an upper body press and an upper body pull. And those can be vertical, horizontal, prone, unilateral, bilateral. We'll mix up to make sure that we're checking all those boxes to just have some variance in the different planes that we are addressing those pushing and pulling movements. And then typically at the end, we'll look at just doing a little prehab stuff, like some eccentric hamstring work. We have slingshot bands. We'll have the kids do band marches and whatnot. And then also we'll do different core variations. We have like an advanced core set. We have 3 different versions of it, dead bug variations that we want to throw in there as well. So typically when they come in, it's a head to toe workout. Although during the off season, sometimes we'll mix it up and we'll have like a lower body and an upper body day, and they'll have 2 versions of that throughout the week, like a Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday of the upper lower. But typically when they come in, it's a full body lift. But again, like everything's dependent upon the time of year and what else they have going on. This summer we're doing, because like I said, during the spring, we really addressed like getting stronger. So our summer training looks much different. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we're doing a full body lift, followed by our energy system development, our conditioning at the end. And then Tuesday, Thursdays are our speed and agility days, where they'll come in and do some prehab work, good warm up, and then they'll go right into their speed and agility stuff. So I would say like Monday, Wednesday, Friday are our high intensity days. Tuesday, Thursday are our low intensity days. As far as the student athlete's perception goes, obviously we understand that like sprinting and plyos are a lot of stress on the body, but they tend to rate those days easier days because obviously there's not conditioning involved.
Right. Norris, what have you seen as the, I'm sure that you see having a performance coach work with your guys as a huge benefit. What are some of the things that you've noticed in their overall performance, after developing, from a freshman year, maybe to their second year, that sort of thing? How have you seen them get better, solely based on their work with a performance coach? And that's kind of a tough question, solely based, but
right.
I think
look, I think the better way to maybe describe it is just that, a good sports performance program is critical to the continued development of student athletes. And we see that with our guys. The spring for us, because our season, as I mentioned before, is very intense. There's a lot of matches in the fall. It makes it difficult to try to make any kind of gains, especially for the guy in the fall, especially for guys that are playing, 90 minutes twice a week or something close to that. So, our sports performance cycle is such that the fall is largely, maintenance and injury prevention and that kind of thing. The spring is where you see more gains as I don't know if I'm even using the right terms here anymore, David, but that would be, the way that we've always kind of described it. And when the program is good and guys embrace it and work hard at it, we see our guys get significantly better. They're also, they're, for the most part, they're 18 to 22-year-olds. So they're still growing. They're still maturing, a lot of them. And so, that in combination, as long as they're sleeping well, eating reasonably well, that kind of thing, it's a good opportunity for them to continue to grow and get better. And so we do see that, we do some minimal, I don't want to say minimal, but we do some different types of testing throughout the spring to try to, one, keep it fun and competitive. There's a great phrase that we've always tried to remind ourselves of, people prepare for what you inspect, not what you expect. And I think that's a great way to look at it. I don't live and die by testing and test results as far as sports performance goes, but the kids like to see that they're making progress. They like to see that they're making improvement. And so having some occasional testing, I think, is good. And so, we see guys make progress in, vertical leap, standing broad jump, NordBoard testing, obviously any of the running, whether it's agility or sprinting or anything like that, when guys can see that they're making improvements there, they buy in more and they get more excited about training. And they also can compete with their guys. I mean, like we have guys that when we're doing, a vertical leap test of some kind, they're definitely looking to see what their buddies are getting, and they're trying to beat them. So look, it's all good. And we are much like UIC, where David is, we're not Power 5 schools. We don't necessarily have the resources or the people, or the time necessarily because of maybe the lack of staffing to do everything that we would want to do, or to be, to think that we're going to compete maybe with some Power 5 schools in those areas. And so, having quality be at a really high level as opposed to relying necessarily on quantity is critical for us to try to bridge that gap and try to compete with maybe some of those other programs.
I think Chris hit the nail on the head there. When I was hired here, I was told that our mission is to operate like a Power 5 with what we got, right? So we're trying to hire high performers and high level coaches that like are coming in, bringing these ideas of like, hey, well, what can we do with what we have? And so, back to what Chris was saying about testing, like, yeah, testing is great because we want to show student athletes and coaches like, hey, we're moving the needle in the right direction and we're improving. But those are also baseline numbers where if we have a student athlete that's been injured, that we can use for return to play, right? So if I know that, Johnny typically comes in every morning and jumps a 30-inch on the jump mat cold, that like if he's only jumping 25, like he is not at the level that he was before his injury. So like we use some of these metrics that we take, even as like gross and rudimentary as some of the things that we're able to do here are, like it's still data, right? And we can use that data for a number of reasons, and return to play is a big part of it as well. So like sports medicine, we'll share our numbers with them, and when it comes time to like green light somebody to get back on the field, like they have to get checked off by everybody, not just the athletic trainer, but also us as well. And we have like sort of a mandatory minimum number of tests that we make each student athlete do, so that we have the data to be like, all right, well, let's just see where you are with your mandatory minimums. And then just kind of gives us more confidence sending them back out on the field before they do their sport specific testing for return to play.
One of the things I had written down here to ask you about was, functional strength. You kind of grazed on it a little bit, but like when you're talking about soccer, what are some of the key movements and ways to develop those movements from your perspective, to improve and get some gains? So Norris said.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like for our soccer student athletes, they need to be able to sprint. They need to be able to decelerate. They need to be able to change direction. They need to be able to jump and land safely and effectively. They need to be able to do it on 2 legs and 1 leg. They need to be able to get off the ground as quick as possible. They need to be able to rotate when they're changing direction. So like back to that transverse plane idea, everything's not just forward and backward. A lot of it is at funky angles. They need to be able to time and react to things in the air. So, I mean, again, like a lot of these functional things that we're looking at, we're trying to come up with creative ways to develop those things in here. And again, back to what I said earlier about like pivoting from being a strength conditioning program to be a sports performance program, like that is the end goal right there. Like, looking back, 20 plus years of doing this, I would go into a sport coach's office and show them all these numbers of guys lifting these heavy weights and really fast 40-yard dash times and whatever. And at the end of the day, like, hey, that's great, but it doesn't necessarily translate to what it is they need to do on the field. So again, really the way we can measure some of these things is by going out and watching training. And again, it requires you to be more involved. It requires you to go out to practice. It requires you to, watch your student athletes play in games and go into coaches' offices the next morning and discuss like individual performances from players and realize things that kids do well and things they don't do well. And some of it can be improved or enhanced in the weight room. And some of it is just something you need to recognize, be like, that's not something that student athlete does well. We need to find someone else that can do it better. Right. So to answer your question, obviously, like function over form here. We want athletes that, can play the style of play that we play here. And again, like we don't have amazing soccer athletes here. We have like very technical soccer athletes here. So like my job is even more important because I have to like develop to the best of my ability the athleticism that I can out of student athletes. The work ethic is there. These kids work their tails off and they love the sport of soccer. So like, what we do in here is pretty important to try to helping them compete against some of the more athletic opposition within our conference and obviously in the Power 5 schools we play against.
Yeah, so I mean, the athletes are pretty demanding of you as well. I mean, they probably expect a lot out of you.
In a perfect world, yeah. I mean, that's what I want. I want athletes that are like beating down my door and, texting me at all hours of the night, asking me like, what can I do for this and what can I do for that? But yeah, I mean, I think it's tough to do our job when we're in settings where you don't have that, where you don't have kids that want to work hard and don't have high demands and high expectations. So fortunately here, what I just try to do is remind kids about what they said, in October and November of last year, right? Like when our numbers are low and I don't see kids for a couple of days, I just send them a message and be like, I remember sitting in a locker room in November with a lot of guys with tears in their eyes talking about this, wouldn't happen again next year. And this is what we're going to do differently this year. So sometimes kids just need to be reminded about the commitments that they make. And again, like obviously soccer is the primary thing they need to be working on, but this is part of it as well. And so I think when they get away for the summer, they tend to gravitate to the things they enjoy doing, which quite often is playing soccer. And so I have to constantly be a reminder that this is part of the process as well. Like if you're going to bank on being as good and as athletic as you were in the spring, this upcoming fall, that's not good enough, right? Like it wasn't good enough in the spring. And if you're not, moving the needle to try to get better in the fall, if you're trying to come back the same player you were in the spring, then that's not going to be good enough. And as sports performance coaches, like we are the only coaches that are allowed to work with the student athletes during the summer. It has to be on a voluntary basis, but we can't actually coach and instruct them. So I'll send out text messages quite often, just checking in on guys to make sure that they're doing okay. And then that conversation will quite often lead into, why haven't I seen you?
Take a high school kid, he or she trying to get better. They live in a place or their economic situation isn't such that they can, hire someone to guide them through the process. And so an obvious place to turn is the internet. And specifically, like, there's all kinds of Instagram influencers that I know Norris follows. And how do you figure out who's someone that you can, trust and is giving out good information? Do you like totally blow that off, or and can you offer maybe some good resources for kids who need to rely on the internet to get better?
Yeah. So to start off, what you said about a high school kid that doesn't have resources to a lot, like, I would keep it as simple as possible, right? And by simple as possible, I mean sprinting, jumping, doing body weight calisthenics, even like you said earlier, going out for a run, those are really simple, basic things that are going to give you a lot of bang for your buck. The stuff you see on Instagram, I mean, you're not going to get clicks and likes if you're posting videos of you doing air squats, right? Like the intention of that is to put something nuanced and different.
Depends on who it is, but yeah, you're probably right.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't see a whole lot of like people doing like the basics really, really well. I see a lot of people like trying to reinvent the wheel on social media. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, like, I would like take that with a grain of salt. I think there's always things that I take away from those people that I want to sprinkle into my programming just to see like how the student athletes react to it, what sort of benefit we get from it. But again, it doesn't replace like the meat and potatoes, so to speak, right? Those are just like things that you experiment with. And if you get a good, return on investment, maybe that becomes a staple of your program. But yeah, I mean, like, you can't go wrong with like sprinting and jumping. If that's what your strength conditioning program looks like as a high school kid, then you're probably going to do okay, like moving up to the next level when you actually have someone to instruct you and teach you or refine what skills you have. But yeah, there's a lot of like central nervous system benefits and athletic benefits from sprinting and jumping and changing direction.
Yeah. It seems like you talked a little bit about your warm-ups and like a dynamic warm-up and that sort of thing. I've seen a lot of kids nowadays with the foam rollers and the percussion massagers and that sort of thing. Norris, I know you have guys in your team that lug those things all over the place. You utilize those things. What's the current thinking on that? And useful, not useful, beneficial?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're useful and beneficial for like a multitude of reasons, right? I mean, like a good structured warm up in some instances can be a great workout, right? I mean, you're getting extra work capacity in, and you're addressing like musculoskeletal issues, right? You're also priming the nervous system for whatever it is they're about to do. I think the challenges of warm-ups and mobility work and foam rolling, all that, is it's not fun, and like kids don't particularly enjoy doing it. So I try to have like 3 or 4 different go-to warm-ups that I utilize, and I try to rotate them a little bit. And some student athletes like some versus others, but at the end of the day, I want to make sure that I've got something that they can effectively get their chili hot, so to speak, and get them ready for whatever it is they're about to do. The thing that I can't stand is when student athletes like bastardize a warm up, right? Where they're not putting the intent into it that needs to be done. And they're not getting the benefits that are intended behind the time. Because if we're allocating time towards this, then it needs to be done with intent. So, I mean, again, that all boils down to like how you introduce it, how you instruct it. I mean, sometimes you have to make warm-ups more structured just to make sure it's done properly. Other times, you have student athletes that can get it done without somebody standing over.
Yeah, Norris, how much do you guys stress that sort of thing within your team? Is that something you guys utilize a lot, or do they kind of kids just kind of bring it on their own?
Yeah. Well, so we have them available. So we have foam rollers, for example. We have foam rollers available, I should say, that are, specific to our program. So guys will bring them out for training. They'll definitely bring them out for training on recovery days. And, different guys, it's like David said, different guys will be more tuned into that, will be more willing to do those things. Some guys have lacrosse balls or softballs that they use. A lot of guys have some form of Theragun that they use. So, we don't discourage it, certainly, and we try to make as much of that stuff as we can available to them. But our culture is good right now. Like our group of older players is good as far as trying to cross T's and dot I's. And so, they prepare pretty well, I think, for training and certainly for matches. And I think that they've, gotten some of the younger guys into that frame of mind as well. I feel like our group does a pretty good job of that. We do track that stuff, across seasons. We track soft tissue injuries. We compare that to training loads and all the data that's available to us. We try to, make sure that we're preparing guys as well as possible, and also that we're not putting them in bad positions where they're more likely to get injuries just because of the decisions that we're making about what we're doing. And at the moment, we seem to be doing pretty well. This past year was pretty good as far as, not having a lot of soft tissue injuries, feeling like guys were recovering pretty well from one session to the next and from, one game to the next. So
I think the biggest realization that athletes make when they transition from like the collegiate level to like professional level is the importance of like the lifestyle factor stuff, the warm-up stuff, the soft tissue stuff, because at that point they know like, hey, if I'm not available, there's a chance that I'm going to miss out on an opportunity. And so like the sooner kids realize that in college, like the better off they're going to be.
Yeah. And just for clarity's sake, just keeping in mind who our audience is, kind of define what a soft tissue in your mind injury is. We're talking hamstring.
Yeah, so probably the most common one we hear about is like somebody pulling their hamstring or straining their hamstring. But that could be a groin, it could be like a hip flexor, calf. I mean, these are some common soft tissue injuries we see in the sport of soccer. So again, what happens like anytime you do work, like and again, like you dehydrate a muscle, like adhesions form in that muscle, and fascia, which is the layer between the skin and the muscle, like it gets tight, right? So that's the value in the warm up is to increase the core body temperature, get the blood moving, getting blood to the fascia and tissue so that it starts to resemble good quality tissue that you would see like when it's in a primed and ready state. So that's really what the purpose of foam rolling and warming up and all that good stuff is. Theraguns is you're just trying to prime the tissue to get it to slide and glide like it's intended to do, rather than to stick. Because when the soft tissue sticks and it doesn't slide and glide like it should, then some other muscles having to compensate, and when it compensates, that's when you kind of tend to see other kind of strains of soft tissue.
So it's come a long way from doing our 10 toe touches when we were kids.
Yeah, I mean, 100%, right? But even at this age, I don't like to warm up, but I always feel better after I do it. So
yeah, for sure. Last thing, supplements. Let's dip our toe into what you think about supplements. I know it might be a nutritionist question, but I'm sure that you get asked about all the time. For a kid who's 16 and hasn't filled out yet, and he thinks he needs to take a bunch of weight gainer or creatine or that sort of thing, like what are your thoughts on it? And
yeah,
what should kids do?
So the number one supplement available on the market is called sleep, right? If you want to increase free testosterone levels, like naturally. Nothing does it better than sleep does. So that's the number one thing I tell kids is like, really focus on good quality sleep, good sleep hygiene, and your testosterone numbers will increase, and that will put you in a position to progress from a lean body mass standpoint. Beyond that, like, creatine has certainly passed the test of time. People are microdosing it these days, taking 5 grams once a day. In addition to improving your ability to increase strength and lean body mass, it also has some cognitive brain function as well, which is sort of a nuanced research discovery. There's a lot of other things, but again, like, we try to get our kids to get their calories from whole foods, but we do provide protein as a way to make sure they're getting enough of it. Because most kids, if they're getting adequate caloric intake, they're probably not getting adequate protein intake. So we have shakes and bars available for student athletes that typically are about 25 grams per serving. And again, we want our student athletes to get a gram per pound of body weight. So, and that's tough for these kids to do with what they have available. So, we have Gatorade bars and shakes at the student athletes, Muscle Milk, Boost, I believe, over there as well, for the student athletes to use. We also have like some vegan alternative shakes that we provide student athletes that have a different type of protein, soy protein. But again, I think the biggest supplement that I could recommend would be, beyond sleep, would be creatine. It's been documented for probably 30, 40 years now, and it's proven to be safe. I think the biggest thing you need to make sure of is that you're getting it from a reputable company that doesn't manufacture in a way where you could get something that's contaminated, right? Like, because we need to make sure that they're NCAA compliant if you're a college athlete, and when they do drug tests. So just making sure that, like, the company that you're using manufactures it in a way where it's not getting contaminated with other products.
Yeah, there are like certifications that supplements need to have in order for them to meet this.
A lot of time they'll document in the packaging that it's NCAA compliant or WADA compliant or something like that. Thorne is a very reputable company. It's pretty expensive, but like, they do a good job of making sure that they keep things compliant and make sure people are safe from not popping positive.
Gotcha. Yeah. What else? Am I missing anything you wanted to touch on? Could be useful. Norris, did I miss anything? Probably
No.
lots.
I mean, I see a lot of, I coach youth sports in addition to William & Mary. I see a lot of kids crushing an energy drink before a game.
Yeah. I mean, again, not recommended, right? That's a lot of caffeine and a bunch of other stuff going into their bodies. Artificial sweeteners sometimes not artificial sweeteners, just a ton of sugar, right? But again, I think people are looking for that quick fix and whatnot. And again, like, all we can do is try to educate them the best we can. But yeah, we don't allow, I mean, I'm sure kids probably do energy drinks, but they're not allowed to like bring them in the facility or have any sort of like pre-workout stuff in here other than what we give them.
So what are some of the effects that are harmful from, down on an energy drink prior to engaging in exercise or your sport?
Well, I mean, I think the biggest thing is like the heart rate response, right? It's going to increase your heart rate to a level that's higher than what it would normally be. And if you're participating in like high intensity exercise where, you're reaching, approaching max heart rate, that could potentially be like create cardiac issues for student athletes. A lot of them are like have vasodilators in them, so that like if something were to happen and you were to start bleeding, it could be difficult for you to control that bleeding because of the lack of like coagulant, from the vasodilator. I mean, those are the big ones, right? And then again, like, some of this stuff isn't regulated by the FDA, so you don't exactly know what you're getting. And that's always a risk anytime you're putting anything in your body where you don't know that is what it says it is. All things that could be potentially be risky.
So what do you recommend prior to a match or an intense workout or hour and a half training session, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so we require or recommend our student athletes consume 4 of these per day. So I think consuming one of these 60 minutes before a match is a good start. Gives them time to go to the bathroom and starts the hydration process. But again, like as long it's about having a plan, right? Like there's a bunch of different ways you could do it. We've decided that like giving them a target to consume 4 of these a day is a good way to address the hydration issue. But I think that's the biggest thing. You don't necessarily need a stimulant to perform at a high level. And again, like a safe stimulant would be coffee, but I don't see many 8-year-olds out there drinking coffee.
They should start. That's my recommendation. All right. Anything else, guys? That was awesome.
I think you had a question on there about like movements you should avoid.
Yeah.
Didn't you have something about that? Yeah. And my only thought regarding that would be like anything that causes pain, right? Like you can get as creative as you want with your like exercise selection, but like if a student athlete comes to you and tells you something causes them pain, you need to examine that, right? Like it could be like a technical issue that you could correct where the pain goes away. But like if it's something that habitually causes them pain, then you need to find an alternative movement. I've worked with plenty of kids that have had like, pre-existing issues to where it doesn't matter what I did, like squatting caused pain for them. And I had to find alternative movements for them. So just listening to student athletes, and if anything causes pain, then you need to find an acceptable alternative for them.
How do you deal with what's one of the best ways to deal? That's not the right way to ask it. How do you deal with delayed onset muscle soreness? What are some good strategies?
Yeah, simply put, motion is lotion, right? Like get up and start moving, whether it's going for a 20-minute walk, doing a little dynamic warm up, doing some low volume body weight exercises. Like that's going to help with getting rid of some of that delayed onset muscle soreness. But that's what we tell our kids all the time. Like when you're sore, don't be afraid to train. Don't be afraid of anything. Like get up and start moving, and you'll start to notice some of that soreness will start to dissipate.
Cool. All right. I'm going to hit stop. Thank you.
Do you want a Marmon story? You always ask if I have a story, and then the one time I have a story, you don't ask me.
Always come prepared.
This is sports performance related. Fits perfectly.
Perfect.
All right.
I expect a counter story, David, after Norris.
So I'll this is back when David had probably just left William and Mary. I think he was, when this happened, I think he was at Iowa, but he might have already gone to Indiana State. And my former associate head coach, Chuck Connolly, is a good friend of ours. And we were doing some spring conditioning, and we had the format was essentially some type of interval running, and to make it sort of more fun and competitive, we were doing it in a relay format where we had teams. Guys were doing, kind of wind sprints, just to use a simple term. And the exchange was with what we in soccer refer to as a penny. And sometimes people call it a bib or a vest, but in soccer, a lot of times you'll hear a penny. And so Chuck and David were talking, after the fact, and Chuck was telling him about how we had done this conditioning, competition. And so David recreated it, wherever he was at the time. And then he talked to Chuck about it afterwards and said, yeah, it was interesting, but like the guys had a really hard time exchanging the penny. And we were like, what's going on? And come to find out, David thought he said penny as in 1 cent. And so he was trying to have guys pass this really tiny penny back and forth when they were, meant to be exchanging the baton, so to speak. And it made the exercise a lot more challenging.
Hey, fine motor skills when you're extremely winded are quite challenging. So we created an element of like dexterity there. So it was appropriate. I forgot all about that.
Great story.
That's awesome.
You don't have anything? You don't have one on our buddy Chris here, David?
No, nothing on Chris. Just positive things to say about him. He's a great role model. Learned a lot from him, and yeah, he's a legend.
Likewise, buddy.
All right, that's a good spot to end. Before someone slings an insult.